Hello and welcome to another Fantasy Premier League video. My name is Steve and today we're taking a look at how my bench boost played out in game week 34, some surprise benchings that happened in the game week that could potentially chuck a spanner in the works for some managers out there, and some potentially aggressive transfers that could be on the table for game week 35. Now, to timestamp this, I'm recording on the 5th of May at 2:30 in the afternoon in New Zealand time, so it's middle of the night over in the UK on the same date. And game week 34 has gone pretty well. For those of us who were wildcarding late and using the bench boost chip in game week 34, I've come away with a score of 140 points, with the average at 82 for the game week, with no hits taken in a game week where quite a lot of hits were being taken around the place. I think when the game kicked off, I was already up like maybe 30,000 rank or something due to just other managers around me taking hits. That score of 140 was a game week rank of about 28k, and it has boosted me up the ranks by 262,000 places, meaning my run of green arrows is continuing, which is great to see. I've only had 3 red arrows since game week 15, which was obviously much needed, having started the season without Haaland, and it's been a bit of a clawback ever since. So, to go through a brief rundown of what happened in game week 34, it actually started quite terribly, to be honest. Zuma was the first man in my team to play in the Crystal Palace vs West Ham fixture. He was the one position I was struggling to fill on the wild card as my last bench spot in order to click on the bench boost chip. And he managed to make it 15 minutes into the game, conceding 1 goal during that time, and then getting carried off the pitch to make him obviously out for the remainder of that game and also for the following fixture against Man City. But having a look back at it now, it was probably a little bit of a blessing in disguise, as Zuma was actually carried off the pitch just 2 minutes before West Ham conceded their second goal. So he managed to hold on to that solo point rather than conceding 2 goals in the first 15 minutes and then being carried off. He would have come away with 0 in a game where West Ham conceded 4 in a 7-goal fixture, 4-3 to Crystal Palace there. And then things just went from strange to worse, sort of, at the start of the bench boost, I suppose. In the Brighton vs Wolves game, a surprise set of benchings from De Zerbi, where he benched McAllister, Matoma and Casado, and managed to score 6 goals in the match, with Solly March the only man out of the 3 most chosen Brighton midfielders, the man starting the game. He played 55 minutes, it didn't even get to the 60-minute mark, and only came away with 1 point in the absolute drubbing of Wolves by 6 goals. And it looked like I was off to a bit of a shocker of a start. Thankfully, I had Steele as my goalkeeper on my bench. I did mention in the last video that goalkeepers on a bench boost are extremely important, because that is where you can pick up a majority of points if you manage to nab a couple of clean sheets. And the way that I actually put my bench boost together was to get rid of all subjectivity, as people going, who should bench what, where and how. I just went with the easiest route of just bench all the cheapest players in the valid formation. That removes all subjectivity from, I would have played this guy and wouldn't have played this guy instead. And so we had Zuma, Botman, March, and Steele on my bench. Steele down at 3.9 million. Comes away with a double-digit return of 15 points, getting 6 in the first game, and then a clean sheet in the second game with 2 bonus to come away with a total of 15. My other keeper was De Gea, who in this morning's game, Brighton vs Manchester United, I was predicting a 0-0 result, and it took a 95th minute handball by Luke Shaw in the box to give McAllister the penalty, which he sunk. Hit it extremely hard, top left corner, absolutely unsavable penalty to earn McAllister 11 points from his second fixture, meaning March was one of my only 3 blankers across the whole team, next to Trippier and Zuma. So obviously Zuma with the injury. March came away with 2 solo points across the 2 fixtures, and Trippier just with a single game against Southampton, only coming away with 2 points there. Brighton, though, 6 goals against Wolves with half a team, making it look easy, and then putting up a very good performance against Manchester United this morning with another bit of rotation. March, this time the man starting on the bench and only getting the last 27 minutes in the fixture. De Zerbi did mention in a press conference at one point that he was hinting at the fact that March, McAllister and Matoma were all first choice and very hard to bench, but given the fixture congestion, he was hinting at the fact that some of these players did need to be benched, and he used the 2 games to do so. So March, McAllister and Matoma all took their fair share of minutes on the bench, with March serving his benching in the second game. Now in the Newcastle areas, Newcastle were one of my only 2 holdings who had a single game week this week. So I had triple Newcastle of Trippier, Isak and Botman, as well as Harry Kane as my single game weekers in game week 34. As I mentioned, Trippier came away with absolutely nothing from the game. Botman on my bench comes away with one of the most jammiest assists you'll probably see from a corner, where he flicked it on with his head and got the own goal. Forget who it actually came off now, but comes away with 5 points on the bench. I was very happy to see that. You do have to get a little bit lucky with some of the bench boost players, because obviously you are scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to funds. 4.4 million for Botman. Quite happy for him to come away with the 5 points. And Isak must have played an absolutely outstanding game in terms of the bonus point system, as he only came away with 1 assist in a game that consisted of 4 goals, so 8 attacking returns in the match, no clean sheet. What comes away with 1 assist and managed to earn the 2 bonus points, which was pretty awesome to see. We will definitely take that from our single game weeker. Wilson, though, scored twice, had 1 additional goal disallowed for offside. He also hit the crossbar twice from close range, and another goal was smothered out by the keeper from about 6 yards. So Wilson was in and amongst the opportunities, definitely in that match against Southampton. He is definitely putting his hand up for the game week 36 double, which is coming up, but that is probably more something for tomorrow's video. In Manchester United's first game against Aston Villa, we managed to come away with a double clean sheet for De Gea and Shaw, and Rashford being the only man being the man that assisted Fernandez's the solo goal in the match, which Fernandez scored to reward all those managers who did manage to hold on to Fernandez through his string of 1 and 2 pointers across the last few game weeks. Now, hopefully those of you out there that did have him did keep faith, because even though he wasn't returning the FPL points, he was playing out of his skin. He was definitely one of the players that I feared not owning, and I have even spent some time this week having a look at what I might be able to do in order to get Fernandez in. But spoiler alert, considering I'm already tripled up on Manchester United, I did say to myself when I made this move on the wildcard that I was basically saying goodbye to Fernandez for probably the remainder of the season, as it'll take a couple of transfers for me to get him in, as I would have to sell either a De Gea or Shaw in order to fund it, or not fund it, but in order to be within the constraints of the game. And there's just too many transfers with not enough weeks left in the season. So I have made my bed with Fernandez. I am going to have to go without. And thankfully, in the second game this morning, he didn't actually hurt me too bad. Obviously, United losing 1-0 in the dying moments in the game means he only came away with a blank in the second fixture. Lindelof, by the way, looks like he's playing amazing in that United defence. The combination of him and Shaw looks pretty solid, and at 4.1 million for any of you that are looking for potentially a cheap way into the United defence, which is looking pretty sturdy from the games that I have seen. They're actually looking like they're playing for each other, working hard together, and there was even some pretty obvious professional fouls going in that first game, with the likes of Malacia and Fred kicking the ball away, blatantly earning himself a yellow card, and then Malacia actually grabbing the pants of the man that he was marking by two hands and actually pulling him back in the 95th minute. So I think United, I saw a stat that United have conceded the fewest goals at home across the season, only conceding 8, which is ranked first. The second closest, Newcastle, with 11, and then Brighton with 14 in third place. Liverpool and Man City both conceding 16 goals in fourth. So Manchester United have conceded half of Manchester City's goals at home, which is why I mentioned the Lindelof trade if anyone out there is looking for a very cheap way into the United backline, with the double coming up in game week 37. The Liverpool versus Tottenham fixture is probably the game of the season that I have seen to date. Absolute mayhem of a game. They had even Jurgen Klopp pulling his hammy during an over-celebration in front of the official, which earned him a yellow card and what looked like a pulled hamstring from Klopp, which was funny as to see. Harry Kane came away with just the solo goal in a 7-goal game and managed to earn himself 2 bonus points. So again, the consistency of Kane and what he's doing on the pitch, even if he only scores 1 goal and 7 goals going in, he's still coming away with bonus points. He is my differential on the wild card. So my wild card, I went with a 3 premium setup in order to fund Harry Kane. That did mean that I obviously couldn't go with the likes of Trent Alexander-Arnold, which I was happy to cover with the likes of Kanate, who obviously didn't do so well in that first game. Trent coming away with an assist, but for the 2.5 million, so Kanate's down at 4.8 million. I think Trent is somewhere up around about 7.3 million. Trent coming away with 1 assist in that first game, which actually only earned him, I think, the extra 3 points over Kanate. That 2.5 million saving for the 3 points there is probably savings well spent considering it's gone into Harry Kane up front. So we're more than happy that Kanate has managed to keep playing, because when we brought him in on the wild card, he was a bit of a punt as to whether or not he was going to continue playing or whether Joel Matip was going to come back into that slot. But it looks like Kanate has held down his spot and managed to come away with a clean sheet in that second fixture. He actually only got 0 points in that first game, as he did concede the 2 goals for the -1 and a yellow card. Elsewhere in the Liverpool team, Diaz returned to the first 11 and scored the second goal in the game after just 5 minutes of play. So there's quite a little bit of rotation going on in the Liverpool squad. I see Tsimikas also got some minutes there. Jota also, who was a differential play for a lot of managers who went with the free hit in game week 34, which looks like probably wasn't as great because most free hitters went with Kevin De Bruyne on the free hit, who ended up being injured, which we didn't find out about until after the deadline, and missed both fixtures, meaning free hit managers were getting someone in off the bench. And Jota was another man who was potentially high up the pecking order for managers that were free hitting. Bit of rotation there. I think Jota came away with, might have been about 5 points. I will have to double check that, don't quote me on it. But Spurs defense is just going from bad to worse. I think at the last video I mentioned Perisic and Porro being just not at all defenders, and yeah, these things continue with Tottenham conceding, was it 4 goals in the game. It's just I would be staying well clear of the Spurs defense. It doesn't look like they are going to be keeping a clean sheet anytime soon. And this stat that I saw, I think it might have been on Match of the Day, for the most Premier League goals conceded in the first 15 minutes of the game for the entire season, Tottenham is way out, or not way out, but is out in front with 13 goals conceded in the first 15 minutes of play across the entire season, which is a crazy high number of goals to be conceding very early in the match. Second place Bournemouth with 12 goals, Leicester with 11, and then Liverpool conceding 9 in the first 15 minutes of the game, going to show that is probably why Kanate has secured his run of starts, as it looks like Jurgen Klopp has chosen Joel Matip as the sacrificial lamb for the reasons as to why Liverpool were conceding a lot of early goals. Mo Salah came away with just a solo goal in the first game, which I believe was a penalty, and then the only goal in the 1-0 win over Fulham, which actually looked like a very competitive game. Fulham and Liverpool looked like they were on about even par for that whole match, but the penalty in that game earned Salah all 3 bonus to come away with 18 points as my top scorer for the game week, closely behind Haaland, who was my captain. It was probably basically everyone else's captain apart from one guy in my one of my private leagues who actually went with Salah and earned the extra 2 points over the top there to beat my bench boost score. I think he ended up on 142. Shout out Blake, well done. You beat me by 2 points, you bastard. But yeah, congrats on going with Salah, I guess. I went with Salah the week earlier to get absolutely burnt by that move, with Haaland coming away with 14 points in that fixture against Arsenal, where I went to captain Salah against West Ham, who only came away with 2. So I was not in the mood to be captaining Salah second week in a row, as those 15 points or a 14 point difference could have drastically helped my overall rank, but I thought it was worth the punt last week considering Haaland was playing against Arsenal and it was a top of the table clash. And to come to Man City, as I think I've covered everyone else in the squad, Haaland obviously doing Haaland things. He has broken all the records. So he scored his 50th goal in that first match to go one goal beyond Clive Allen's 49 goal record that stood since the 1986-1987 season, a benchmark that thought was never going to be broken. So Haaland scoring 50 goals in all competitions, and then in the fixture against, it's the second fixture against West Ham, was it? I forget which way around that went. Yeah. So in the 3-0 game against West Ham, Haaland then got the 35th goal of a Premier League season, breaking Andy Cole and Alan Shearer's joint record of 34. He managed to achieve that in 31 games, as he has missed a few through injury. And I think Cole and Shearer's records stood when there was actually more than 38 games in a season. So Haaland is just a robot. That's what he's actually a magician. He's an amazing finisher. He has got so many different levels to his game, and his movement is just undefendable on so many different levels. As I mentioned, Kevin De Bruyne missed out both games due to injury. Now he on the video last week, he was the man that I was looking to bring in this week for Salah, as I want to target this Leeds fixture, but we will get onto that in a minute. Before I go through Grealish, who managed to get 2 starts. He had a bit of a quiet game in terms of FPL points in that first match against Fulham, but he was very involved in that game. He could have come away with actually quite a few points in that fixture. He was unlucky to do so, and he was actually the man who assisted Haaland's record-breaking goal in the second fixture. So Grealish comes away with 7 points, which was good to see, as he is probably a bit of a differential. He is actually the slot where Fernandes would be in most teams out there, so he's a little bit behind Fernandes in the fact that I think Fernandes came away with 11, 13 points, something like that. But some of that Fernandes money is obviously sitting in Harry Kane up front, so the combination of the two has done all right there. And Edersen was benched in that second game against West Ham. Now, this is actually a bit of an interesting headache for any managers that have Edersen, because although the narrative may be that it is just a rotation, I don't believe that goalkeepers actually get rotated too often. It's not like they, they're going to come up with cramp or anything in the match. It's not that type of role in a football team. And I suspect that Pep has probably actually had enough of the fact that Edersen has been conceding a goal every game from the only shot on target in each match. And in that Man City vs Fulham game, even though they were obviously dominant in the fixture, when they did concede that one goal, you could see some of the frustration around the other defenders on the pitch. They were just super annoyed that they had not kept the clean sheet. There has obviously been words being said in the dressing room. It would be something that would definitely be irking someone like Pep, who is obviously going for absolute quality across the squad, rotating players left, right and centre, and so no one is safe. And I actually wonder if Edersen has been dropped instead of just rotated. Doesn't make sense that he'd be rotated for any sort of match fitness or anything like that. The string of conceding one goal with very low XG shots and conceding one goal in every game to wreck the clean sheet for all those for the defenders in front of him. They've been working very hard to keep the shots down across the whole match, and to have that happen in so many different fixtures seemingly in a row. It wasn't all in a row, but there was definitely a string of matches where they just shouldn't have conceded, and yet they were conceding a goal in every game. I actually wonder if Ortega is actually going to take Edersen's spot again this weekend, considering he actually had a really good game in that fixture against West Ham. I think he racked up quite a few saves. There were some very good shots stopped in that match, and I wonder if Edersen was in goal, whether or not Man City would have actually conceded in that fixture. And so I don't think anyone out there that actually owns Edersen should be selling him this week, because one benching could just be as simple as maybe giving him a bit of a rest. But I would be very nervous running into this next game if I was an Edersen owner. So for any of you out there that do own Edersen, I would be keeping a very close eye on what's going on there, because if he is benched again in game week 35, he is probably a fire sale waiting to happen for the double in 37 that is coming up. You'll probably need to look at alternatives, maybe going for a DS, maybe even a John Stones in defense, which would be annoying, as that would be a couple of transfers, and it would also be a goalkeeper transfer, which we do not want to be focusing on with so few game weeks remaining in the season. Foden also gets his third run out in 3 matches off the bench, but with very small minutes being played in each of these games. So Foden has now played 3 minutes, followed by 7 minutes, followed by 13 minutes, all off the bench in the last 3 games. However, he's managed to get an assist and a goal in 23 minutes played across 3 of the last 3 games. So even though he's been out with appendicitis or appendectomy, he went through his surgery, he looks like he's fit, back and ready, and getting in and amongst the attacking returns. I wonder if he will potentially start this week against Leeds at home, and if he does do so, that will most likely be at the expense of Grealish, who I do have in my squad. And so this probably is a good point to jump across, into my game week 35 plans. So this is how the team lines up at the moment. It's just my bus team that I set up as soon as the deadline clicked over for the start of game week 34. So I've got Steele in net, starting against Everton at home, as I'm benching De Gea away to West Ham this week. Trippier is on against Arsenal at home. We're starting Kanate against Brentford at home. That's a tricky fixture for Liverpool. I do suspect Brentford will score in this match, but considering it is a home game, and I do not really have any other options on the bench, with Botman being my first defending bench member and Zuma, who is still injured. I would not be playing Botman over Kanate, and Shaw will be starting away to West Ham. Across the middle of the park, we have a benching headache this week, with Rashford away to West Ham, Salah at home to Brentford, McAllister at home to Everton, and Grealish at home to Leeds as my 4 chosen starters. This means I will be benching Solly March at home to Everton after March's rest. Now obviously I made all these picks before knowing what had even happened in either of the Brighton games. But I would favour playing Grealish against Leeds over March at home to Everton. I do not think I'd be starting March over the likes of Rashford or Salah, and because McAllister has penalties, he's default pick for me over the two Brighton assets that I own. Now, I will... Grealish is actually on the list of a potential transfer spot in my team, but I'll cover that in a second. To finish off the team up front, we have Isak starting at home against Arsenal. Haaland captain at home to Leeds this week. Now, he could potentially be up for a rest with Champions League fixtures coming up as well. And Harry Kane up front at home to Crystal Palace as my vice captain. And that rounds off the squad. Now, obviously, this team is pretty stacked because I wildcarded in game week 31 and I've just come off a bench boost, and so obviously my bench is going to be a little bit stacked. But I am quite happy for that, considering there has obviously been quite a lot of surprise rotation, especially in the Brighton squad, but in some of the other teams around the place. Now, if I actually look across the 15 players in my team, there are a whole bunch of them that are just locked into my team, and I'm absolutely not even going to touch them unless there is some sort of injury or we get early team news that they have been dropped. So, to go through that, the players that are currently locked into my team is obviously Haaland is going nowhere. Even if he is benched for this game against Leeds, he will not be sold in my team. I will just be holding on to him. I'll be more than happy to have Solly March come in off the bench for Haaland if that is the case. I don't think there's any point in doing the hokey cokey with Haaland, as I'm obviously going to want him back for the run out for Man City's remaining games, as they still have a double to play in 37, and they have Leeds at home and Everton away in the next two games. Two teams that we should be targeting for both attackers and defenders, trying to heavily invest in attackers for both Leeds and Everton. So Haaland is definitely not being sold in my squad. Kane is also my differential in this team. He is the third premium that I have chosen to go with his string of 8 points, 11 points, 6 points, 2 points, 9, 7, 6, 13 in the last string of games. I do not want to be selling him, as he is just consistently ticking away in my squad. Salah is also temporarily locked into my team. I was considering selling him for Kevin De Bruyne this week in order to jump onto this Leeds fixture, and that is the Man City vs Leeds fixture is the fixture that I am looking to maximise with my potential aggressive transfers this week. But Salah will be locked into my team until at least game week 37, when the doubles pop up, and Salah does not have a double in that game week. So it looks like Salah will be locked into my team until about then. As I've already mentioned, I've made my bed with Fernandes, and that is because I'm already tripled up on Manchester United, and so I will not be altering any of these players unless there is some sort of news that someone has been dropped or is injured. Similarly, with Brighton, I've already made my bed with Brighton. I've tripled up with McAllister, March and Steele. None of them will be going anywhere from my squad, as they do have the double next week. And then Trippier is probably at least locked into my team this week, because Newcastle are doubling alongside Brighton next week. Now that only leaves a few spots in my team in order to tinker with for transfers. Those being Isak up front, Grealish in the midfield, and then three defenders of Kanate, Botman, and Zuma. Now, considering I want to be relatively aggressive with my transfers, considering there's not too many games left in the season, the only spots I'm really looking to fiddle around with is Isak and Grealish. I do not want to be transferring Kanade, Botman, or Zuma. Obviously, Botman is probably just going to stay as he is doubling next week, even though it is a bit of a tricky defensive double for Newcastle as they have to play Leeds and Brighton. Leeds not so bad, but that Brighton game is tricky in the double. Arsenal this week is not ideal, and then Chelsea on the final game week of the season probably not ideal either. That Leicester game we are not too worried about. So it really doesn't leave me many spots to play with in my team. Now, I do not necessarily want to be selling Isak, as obviously Newcastle double next week. However, he could be the make way if we get early team news that Alvarez is going to start. Now, if Kevin De Bruyne is still out and injured, and Alvarez is going to start in this Leeds fixture, I will be very tempted to jump on him, and Isak would be the make way. So it would be a 1 week hokey cokey play where I buy Alvarez this week for Isak, and then the following week I will be buying back either Isak or Wilson, depending on any news that we get for the double next week. So that is one potential transfer that I will be looking at making. Now, I would love to make this move if we do get the early team news, because, as I said, most of my team is locked in and I do not really have any transfers lined up for the next couple of game weeks. I've already got triple Newcastle, triple Brighton for the game next week. So if I do make this Alvarez play, it will obviously be only a 1 week play with one of the Newcastle lads in order to buy a Newcastle position back for the double next week. However, as I mentioned, Foden looks like he's putting up his hand as a potential starter in this game against Leeds at the weekend. And if that is the case, it will be at the expense of Grealish. And obviously, if we do get early team news that Grealish is benched and Foden is starting, that is a very simple trade for me to go from Grealish to Foden. Foden will be quite a differential, as he has been out of the squad for a while and has only been playing off the bench. Leeds at home is just a super tasty, very high ceiling fixture for any of the Man City lads, attacking lads, that are starting the game. And so if Grealish is benched because he's going to be saved for the Champions League with Foden in his place, I will almost certainly be making that transfer. Thankfully, Man City are among the first games played this week, so there is a much higher chance that we will receive some early team news. So Bournemouth, Chelsea, Man City, Leeds, Spurs, Palace, and Wolves, Aston Villa all kick off as the first game of the weekend in game week 35, and Man City will obviously be very high on everyone's agenda this week. We do need to have plans in place, or the plans already thought out in your head, because if we do get any early team news, it is likely going to be within the last 30 minutes of the deadline, and we will have to make transfers quickly because Man City is the type of team that will take down the FPL servers. So you have to have a very clear idea of what you're going to do. As soon as you see any team news, act quickly, because if you do not get those transfers in quick enough, you may find that the site goes down and your transfers do not go through. Similarly, if Haaland is for some reason going to be benched in order to save him for that Champions League fixture, you will most likely see Alvarez as his replacement, and that will mean that we will need to be switching our captaincy, because Haaland will likely be on the bench and could potentially come on in that match. And even though he could come on and absolutely smash smash goals against Leeds, because Leeds are just looking absolutely woeful in defence, I think that would be enough to strip him of the captaincy, as he could potentially come in late in the match and come away with a 1-pointer in that game. I think my second string captaincy this week will likely be Harry Kane at home to Crystal Palace, but it could quite easily be Mo Salah. I just think Brentford are looking like a much stronger team than Crystal Palace. So both players playing at home, Kane with a slightly easier fixture, even though Spurs have been looking pretty disjointed around the place, they are still managing to generate enough attack to warrant Kane being given the captaincy. Now, if we get absolutely no early team news, so that means we do not know if Alvarez is starting, we do not know if Grealish is starting or not, then I think my plans for the week is probably just roll and run with the team that is on screen. That will give me 2 transfers leading into game week 36's double, which I'm already pretty sorted for, which will mean that I will probably end up with 2 free transfers in game week 38. So keep in mind for any hokey-cokey plays that you do make. So if we do get this Alvarez news, and I am going to run with the Isak to Alvarez and then Alvarez back to either Isak or Wilson the following game week, that will likely mean that I will probably only have 1 free transfer in game week 38. Now, game week 38, last game of the season, all teams play at exactly the same time, and so there is the best chance that we will get early team news from any team or all teams. Obviously, we wouldn't pick up early team news for all teams, but all teams have a much higher chance of us finding out early team news before the deadline. And so having 2 transfers for game week 38 could be a bit of an advantage there. However, there's still a lot to play for in game weeks 35, 36 and 37. Champions League spots are still up for grabs. Europa spots are still up for grabs. Relegation-bound teams are still battling hard in order to get themselves to safety. And by game week 38, you may find that a lot of these positions are already set in stone, and therefore the punts that you can take in game week 38 for the early team news may be from a much smaller set of teams that you might be wanting to plan for. So going into game week 38 with 2 free transfers could be really good, but you may find that you have to go with some really left field picks that are just really 1 week punts. Well, obviously they're going to be a 1 week punt because it's the last game of the season, but you may be punting on a much less quality player in game week 38, which could be good. But I think if we went Isak to Alvarez, knowing that Alvarez was starting for an Alvarez versus Leeds home fixture, I think there's probably a lot more points up for grabs for Alvarez in that game as there would be for some supposed early team news in game week 38. So some managers are looking to roll into game week 38 with 2 free transfers. I'm not as worried about doing that. I don't think there is as much potential benefit there. Obviously, there could be some really key early team news to say someone like Man City, Liverpool, Spurs play Leeds on the last day. I mean, a Sun punt for that last game of fixtures could be quite key, but you don't really need early team news to know that Son is likely going to start in that fixture. And so for the hope of early team news and to have 2 free transfers in order to jump on that early team news just might not be that great. And so holding back these transfers when there's still a lot of points up for grabs over these next coming game weeks, I think I'm going to side more on the play aggressive and play early, and then just go with one free transfer in game week 38 for a 1 week punt at that point. So I think that's how it's going to run out. If we have early team news, I will likely be jumping on either Alvarez or Foden. And if there's absolutely no early team news for Man City, I'm probably just going to roll the transfer and run with the team that you see on screen. So a bit of a longer one today. Considering that you are listening to this part of the video, please do consider giving it a like. And if you are new around here, hit that big red subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified about more FPL content coming your way. And until next time, I will catch you again shortly. Cheers.